Well, welcome back to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. And boy, do we have an exciting one for you today. Our guest today is Dr. Anna Gatmon, and she's coming to us from California. There's so much to say about her that I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can. She, at one point, was a supermodel. And in fact, her byline is from supermodel to modern mystic. She's fluent in 4 languages: English, Hebrew, French, and Swedish. Her first award-winning book, Living a Spiritual Life in a Material World, attracted more than 100 different audiences where she spoke, and also a TEDx talk. And her latest book, Shift Calling, is available at shiftcalling.com. And I'm not going to say any more because she will tell you herself. So it's all yours, Anna. The mic is yours.
First of all, thank you, Bob, for having me here. It is such a treat to be invited to your show and to share, to reflect. I've been thinking about how do I organize this, 63 years in the making. There's a lot to share, and I want it to be meaningful to your listeners and engaging. And so I thought I'd actually start with, it's the first paragraph in the book that you're showing there, Living a Spiritual Life in My Material World. So that was my first book. And I think that the first paragraph just situates my spiritual journey in a lens through which could be useful, and maybe others might feel a similar experience. And that is, so the first chapter is, what does your soul long for? And this is what my soul longed for. All my life, I have experienced a profound longing to have access to a hidden world, a place where everything is possible and the rules of being are different than those of our earthly existence. In this hidden reality, my life is sacred. I am loved and appreciated and attended to with care. I feel special and have been given a unique role to make our planet a better place. To do this, infinite wisdom becomes available to me through loving guidance, providing me with the power to change the course of my life and that of others. And so this is the lens I'm choosing today to look at my spiritual journey, this longing for the hidden world. And I'll say 2 things. First of all, as you continue in this chapter, I tell this story of remembering as an adult my birth. And I remember this experience that as I was born into the hospital with neon lights and, metal, like everything very cold, there was another part of me that remained whole, connected, but kind of didn't come along for the birth. If I can say, I could just feel the split. And I think that that's where the longing began, in that split. It's not scientific. I can't explain what it was exactly, but there was this place that is eternal, that remained somewhere above me, within me, I'm not sure. And then there was the body, the Anna, that was born into this human incarnate world. And so the longing began. Many times spiritual people who are in a spiritual quest are called seekers. I've never connected to that term. I choose more a spiritual explorer. But the longing began. And then I also had a childhood that on the one hand, I lived a comfortable socioeconomic life in Israel. I was born and raised in Israel to a Polish-born Israeli father and a Swedish mother. So Jewish father, Protestant mother. There was alcohol in my family. There was rage in my family. I had learning challenges or learning challenges that were never diagnosed. I had a severe stutter, really severe. And I also had red hair, white skin, freckles, which wasn't popular at the time. And in Israel, which is a sunny country, got white skin that burns in 10 minutes. You can't be out in the sun. So it was like everything was hard as a child, emotionally, mentally, learning wise. It was hard. It was hard at school and it was hard at home. There was no adult to mediate my experience. And so that also explains the longing, right? The longing for something else. And my mother would tell me stories, like Sweden, they have stories about the forest and the small little gnomes, the red people, and the divas of the apple tree and the pear tree and the blueberry. There's these beautiful children's stories, and I just longed for this hidden world. And then I grew up and went along my way, and then I realized really again that it's like I've been longing all my life for this hidden world. And the first big shift that happened in my latest book, which is not out yet, so you don't have it on your table, but it's about to come out. It's called Shift Calling, a practical guide to transforming your world. The first big shift that happened to me was that I was in Sweden. I was visiting my mom. My parents had separated. My mom had moved back to Sweden. She'd gone for treatment for her alcoholism, so we were not living with her. And I was sitting one day at a pharmacy in Sweden, waiting in line. I had, red hair, like a bush for hair, a big sweater that I was hiding behind, low self-esteem, the stutter. I was actually due to go back after 6 months to the military service because it's mandatory for women in Israel as well. And a woman approached me and asked me if I want to be a fashion model and travel the world. And nothing could be further away from my internal experience of myself. Nothing.
Right.
So it was like my dad was a pilot, so I had traveled the world. So that didn't impress me, but fashion model, it's like talking to me, like that kind of a thing, right? I do not, for the life of me, know what she saw in me because I felt ugly and I felt stupid because I hadn't succeeded in school for 12 years and I felt unloved, such low sense of worthiness. And so here I was offered an external shift, come to Paris and work as a fashion model. And I still had time between my due date for the army and my time in Sweden. And things evolved, and I was offered to come to Paris for 2 weeks. And I was told that I had a unique look that would either work immediately or would never work. So give it 2 weeks. And I still had time. And so I flew to Paris against my dad's wishes. He was in Israel. I was in Sweden with my mother. And I went to Paris, and after 2 weeks, I was on the cover magazine of the cover of 16 magazine, and spent a decade in Paris, in New York for 2 years, and Yves Saint Laurent, Jean Paul Gaultier. I mean, the biggest names. And it was such a shift. I mean, what was important, it was the first time that I remembered experiences this expansiveness in my chest, that there's a bigger world. It's like, you'd think anyone who's listening now is going like, well, that's a no-brainer. You could go to the military service for 2 years in Israel, or you could fly to Paris and be a fashion model.
What a choice.
It's pretty obvious. Well, I could be in the army for 2 years, but I think I'll go to Paris, right? But that wasn't the experience, because I came from Israel. There was nationalism. My dad had been a pilot in the Air Force. I thought I was going to lose my friends who would feel that I betrayed my country. My dad was against it. It took me 2 months to deliberate and to decide that I'm going for something that felt that it was going to be better for me. I had no clue if it was going to work or not. My dad was afraid I'd be kidnapped and he'd never see me again, right? So, if I reflect on what's in there in that story about a spiritual journey, there's like you're going down the path, the cultural path, the family path, whatever you've been, you just do what your family did and what your destiny is. And suddenly you're offered an opportunity. And for me, it was a very different one. It was like very, very different. And I had the commitment to the army. It's mandatory. You see, I ended up, as I didn't go back to Israel, I ended up not being able to go back to Israel for 3 years. I needed to find another nationality because, it was a big thing. It wasn't a small, I'll just go to Paris. And at some point, I was willing to give up the possibility that I'd lose my friends who wouldn't talk to me again because I betrayed the country. So in this light, you can see it was a bigger choice than just, let's just fly to Paris, right? Yeah. And going to a big city without speaking the language. It was a big, so it takes, first of all, it takes noticing the opportunity. And in 63 years of living, everybody gets opportunities of different kind. I see it, and I see people who take the opportunity, and I see people who don't take it, and then feel bad that the universe isn't sending them like a magic card or an opportunity. But I see that everybody gets opportunities. So that was the first step. The second one, it's a big contrast. So there was a deliberation of my values and my commitment to my family and my friends and my country. It was a huge move. And then it took courage. And it took listening to this place. It was this expansiveness that had joy in it, that had more bliss in it. And it was like, I'm going to take the chance. There's no guarantee. He said 2 weeks, you might work, you might not work. I'll take the risk. I'll give it all up because if it does work, there's probably a better life for me here. So I took the chance and went to Paris and spent 10 years working as a fashion model. So that's like phase one, the big shift.
Okay. In fact, I think you called that a quantum shift, right?
Yes. Yes, a quantum shift, which I write about in my current book. So we get these small shifts all the time. We have to shift all the time. And a quantum shift is really when, well, first of all, it's a big decision, a big shift, but it's also something that over time you see is a big shift. Because at the time I had to buy a ticket to go to Paris. So that was a choice. That wasn't a huge shift. I was given 2 weeks. So if it wouldn't work, I could still go back to the army. It's small daily things. And over time you realize, oh my God, I have changed completely. My life has changed. And so the biggest thing, and that also is a part in my book, is that in order to shift spiritually or to change, to grow in any ways, you really need to shift your perception of yourself. Right? You cannot think of yourself in the same way and hope to bring something new into your life.
I have a feeling that when you shifted that perception of yourself, it involved a shift in perception of your world, not just yourself.
Yes.
Because those seem to go hand in hand.
Yes. Right on. And so my perception of myself is one, and it's one part of my book. And then another part of my book is shifting your perspective on the world. And so in a sense, I'd grown up feeling that the world was harsh because here I was living. Alcoholism was not very prevalent in Israel at the time. It's not a religion where you drink a lot and it's not part of the culture. It's much more now when it's international and there's wine is like a thing. But So to have an alcoholic mother was a big secret, a secret for anyone, but still it's more prevalent in Sweden and in the United States. So it, yeah, it was, I lost my train of thought. Right. A shift in my perspective on the world. So it was like, okay, I've got rage in my family, I've got alcohol in my family, I've got a stutter, I'm going to go to the army. Like this is my it seemed like a dead end, but I didn't even know where it would go. And so to suddenly be given such a big opportunity, it was a shift in my perspective that the world is a benevolent world. And that we get to choose when we are given those gifts, we get to choose, am I going to take it? And yeah, it's scary because you've never done it, because you're living on the edge of creating your life and not knowing how it's going to end. There's a saying that faith begins as an experiment and ends up as an experience.
I love that. That's great.
And yeah, and so it's an experiment. It's like, and some people don't have to give up everything, and some people feel like they have to give up everything, which is what I felt. And maybe I wouldn't have done the big leap if it was a smaller little opportunity under my dad's thumb. I might not have done it. If I lived in Israel and I was given an opportunity, he might have shot it down. And here I was, Sweden, not in Israel, and given this opportunity. So I'm expanding on it, even though it was many years ago now, because it's so rich with what happens at a crossroad of a spiritual opportunity and at a shift that's calling you to live a greater version of yourself, a more fulfilled version of yourself.
Well, it seems like there's, within that experience that you just described, that 1% shift that you talk about, and the quantum shift that you discuss in your book.
Yeah.
So, when I was first reading the galleys of your new book, it struck me that, okay, why are we just engaged in a 1% shift? That doesn't sound like much, and how is that going to affect you? Until I got to the part where you then talk about the quantum shift. But maybe you could talk about the relationship between those two things.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a big gap between what people dream of and what they're actually willing to do to make a change. And Barbara Streisand has a great sentence. If you want to have something you've never had, you're going to have to do something you've never done. And people want big things, but they're not willing to give it all up in order to have it. That's been my experience. People want and dream and then are upset that the universe isn't delivering it, that circumstances aren't delivering what we dream of. And there's things that I dream of that I'm frustrated that I don't get. So it's not that I'm beyond this, right? And so one shift is kind of enough. Just do one small shift, because the smallest shift you do is going to make a difference, right? There's the aviation rule that if a plane shifts only by 1 degree its trajectory, seems very, very little. You imagine it would still make it to the same destination. But the further it flies with just this 1 degree shift, the further it is from where it is supposed to land. And so it's going to land in New York and not in New Jersey or Philadelphia if it stays on the 1 degree trajectory shift. And it can course correct and end up where it wants to be. So I'm trying to simplify the spiritual journey by saying, hey, 1 degree shift is going to make a difference.
I think you're pretty good with these airplane analogies, and I guess that comes from your pilot father. But
Yes, a pilot father and a pilot spouse. So
because the other one that I really loved and wrote down for myself was just the plane that's experiencing turbulence.
yes,
And so, how do you get out of the turbulence? Well, you fly higher, you fly above the clouds.
yeah,
And that's what you do with your life. If things
yeah,
aren't working, fly higher, change your perspective.
yeah,
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 I love that part of
yeah,
your book. Yeah.
yeah. That really is um, that really is what a plane does. It either goes higher. My spouse has corrected me and said, "Well, sometimes it will go lower, but let's keep it at like higher." Um, and so living a spiritual life is not just being at peace all the time. Nothing touches you, nothing concerns you. You're just at peace. I mean, that's being kind of disconnected from yourself. But it's being in your daily life and in big challenges, but having a perspective that's a higher perspective, a more expansive perspective. And I think that the expansive principle is the most revolutionary principle that I discovered during my doctoral research. All spiritual teachings and teachers speak about, expanding your consciousness here, right and left, but no one's actually describing what it is. And for me, that was like, wow, because I realized all spiritual experiences have an expansive quality to them. Either we're physically relaxed, we're breathing more deep, we're more content, we've just had a meditation or we've just had a massage, or so there's a physical component to the expansiveness. But there's also a mental component to it. Suddenly, we find that rather than seeing our problem from a very narrow perspective with only one or two choices and we feel stuck, we've expanded our view and suddenly we have access to much larger range of creative solutions. And so to practice the expansive principle is really important. And I think that my story of the modeling story was one such story of going for the universe offered me an expanded version of myself. And that's what I feel that everyone should know, that the universe will offer you an opportunity for an expanded version of yourself, and go for it. Do it in the way that's right for you, not a suicide. Do it the way that's worked for you and your personality, but take the opportunity because you'll come closer to your soul, to your inner being. So, it reminds me of my spouse, for now 30 something years. So I was living in Paris.
Now be
So he's
careful.
from Israel.
He may watch this.
He might watch this.
Go ahead.
So, turns out we grew up 3 streets apart, and our parents knew of each other, had common friends, but we had never met. And he was 2 years older, and he traveled a bit. So I never saw him in school. I never met him. So I met him many years later in Paris. He was visiting a friend, and we were connected and realized that we came from the same kindergarten and the same primary school. But I had loved before. I'd had a few relationships before, and I was living in Paris. He had moved to Champaign-Urbana in Illinois to study cognitive psychology. And I didn't know what to do, if to stay in Paris, if to move to Champaign-Urbana from Paris. I mean, that's a big shift again. You see, in my life, not for everyone, when I was given an opportunity, it was always a very big shift. It was a radical shift, and I had to make a huge leap of faith. And I recall that when I thought of leaving my life in Paris as a fashion model and trying out living with him in Champaign-Urbana as a student, I remember thinking of the other relationships. I had three major relationships before that. And the information that came to me, so this is intuition, which is another piece that's really important on the spiritual journey. When I pictured each one of the other men that I had been with, what I heard inside was, if you would marry them, what you had when you were with them would be the same for the rest of your life. It would be what you had is what you'd have for the rest of your life. But here, with my spouse, with Leon, and I had no way of knowing this, but the voice inside me said that. I don't even know what the voice was, but it clearly wasn't me. But the voice said, you will go together on journeys, separately, together, internal journeys, external journeys. And that's what I went on. I went on that there would be change. I didn't even know what journeys meant, internal, external, but it felt like there was more, again, an expanded perspective, possibilities, living on the edge of creation with him, space for me to grow personally, for him to grow personally, to grow together. And on that, I left Paris and moved to Champaign-Urbana in Illinois. So again, courage. I like hearing the prompt that shows up, debating. Trust me, I debated on this one a lot. And then having the courage to cross the bridge, allowing the universe to support me, listening to my intuition. These are all steps for me on the spiritual journey. And by the way, I see life as a spiritual practice. It's not something that I do 20 minutes meditation in the morning or on a retreat center. All of the mundane things that happen to us are our spiritual practice. The people we meet, the relationships I've had, everything, all areas of our life, I feel, are the fertile ground for a spiritual practice. And we each get one, maybe two domains that become more intense, through which we get to learn more intensely what our spiritual teaching, what we need to learn. And that's, again, is the shift calling us, because we have a physical ailment, we have financial stress, we have a relationship that's challenging as a parent or as a partner or as a child, whatever it is. And so that becomes, in a sense, we think that it's like we're doomed, it's our curse, but it's our blessing. It's an indication, a harsh one, but an indication, or a harsh one many times, an indication that not everything is right, which we know, but that's the area through which we are going to expand into a larger version of ourselves, bigger potential that we have. We're going to live ourselves more fully. We're going to become more whole. We're going to live more aligned with our soul, our inner being. Yeah. So that's how I live life, and that's what I share in my books. And,
Okay, I want to back up for a minute, because very early on in this discussion, yes, you mentioned that you were not very successful at school when you were in Israel.
Yeah.
You sit here now with a PhD.
Another miracle.
How'd that happen?
In first grade, everybody got A's in all the subjects because it was first grade, and I did not. I did not get A's in anything. So it was clearly there was something there, which I can see now. It was a time when I don't think they had diagnosis of learning challenges. I was creative. I know by today I know that I'm intelligent, and I have certain intelligences, and certain other ones I have weaknesses in them. So I learn more holistically. I learn through experience, rote learning, memorizing is not my forte. Um, so, I left school with a feeling that I'm stupid, dumb, stupid. And I swore I would never go back to school. I would never have that horrendous experience again. And so then my mom went to rehab. I started going to 12-step meetings, decided that I want to be a counselor, an addiction counselor. And I was going to come to the US and I was going to work as a fashion model in LA, make a living, and then I was going to get a master's or whatever I needed to in order to be an addiction counselor. So I was going to be very specialized. And then I met my spouse, and I ended up in Champaign-Urbana, and I went back to school. And the first courses I took, I felt so dumb. My spouse would sit with me and do homework as if I was 5 years old. I mean, I was just brought back right into where I was when I was in school, young. And slowly, I did get an A in Psych 101, which was surprising to me. And then I continued like that. And, the universe just kept giving me it. That's the thing. It's like once you shift that 1 degree for the better, new opportunities begin showing up along the way. And so they amplify the goodness that you have chosen, the new direction, that a favorable one. And if you don't take that 1 degree shift, you're going to get more opportunities of where you are now. And if where you are now is really harsh or challenging, then you're just going to get more opportunities and you're going to say, why is this happening to me? And this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening. Because you're in a trajectory where just more and more of the same is showing up. And if you just do this one little shift, and I offer different shifts in my new book, Shift Calling, but if you do this one shift, the universe starts offering you more of this goodness, and you end up doing a bigger shift and a bigger shift because you're going to bettering your life, to transforming your life and your world and our world. And, we might feel like we're just one person, but when we transform our life for the better, we're alleviating suffering in the world. There's one less person who's weighed down by so much pain and so much suffering. And we live in very intense times. And, very intense times, many of the systems are crumbling and many are being born. And so any shift that we make for the better, we're actually helping transform the world for the better. Otherwise, we're just repeating another war, another war, another war. And we wonder why the economy is awful and resources and everything is just crumbling. And if we choose, there's a saying in Hebrew, I'll try and translate it, better to have, better to have labor pains than torture of war. So it's not like starting to have peace is going to be easy. Oh, well, we'll just be peaceful and it will all go away. We'll have labor pains of peace, but that's much better because we're going towards peace than the torture, the painful torture of war and another war and another war and another war. So.
Well, I have to say, I went through some of the exercises in your new book just for myself to look at where specific shifts have occurred in my life. And one was very similar in scope, that I used to live in a community where the local school had standards that were so high that I saw myself as an average C student. suddenly we actually moved to a farming community, and I was about 2 years ahead of all of the students
Wow.
in the
Wow.
same grade level. And suddenly I was smart.
Wow.
And my whole perception of myself changed.
Yeah.
And, I love the exercises and the questions that you have in your book, because it can take you through your life in a way that you hadn't perceived it in the past, and make you realize where some of those sudden shifts occurred that just seemed part of your life experience. It's no big
Right.
deal. It was,
Right.
just a move from the city to the country.
Yeah.
Uh,
Are you able to pinpoint what specifically made that shift from you being a bad student or feeling bad about yourself to being above everybody else? Was it a bad school and you were just an average, or like what shifted?
well, what actually shifted was the teacher's perspective, the way that they viewed me,
Wow.
and that changed the way that I viewed myself.
Wow. That is so important.
So, and I think a lot of us get our internal perceptions from outside of us, and we believe what people say about us. We
Yeah.
believe what our parents say.
Yeah.
We call it teacher, preacher, and parents, basically, and then your culture.
Yeah.
And you discuss that a lot about yourself as
Yeah.
as you went through these
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
But
And
I
I
think a
think
lot
that,
of us can
yeah.
identify with your experience. That was
Yeah.
all I wanted to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Well, I love that. What a difference. I had a third grade teacher who loved us. She loved us. And it was such a different feeling than first grade and second grade. We had a nasty teacher. So it makes such a difference, huh? It makes such a
Oh yeah.
difference when somebody else, I mean, this woman who saw me that I could be a fashion model, she saw me in a way I couldn't even imagine in my wildest dreams, right? But what it brings, I think that you speak about that we all see ourselves, teacher, preacher, like from our culture, right? Our family culture, our school culture, um, the broader culture. I think that what I try to do, what my attempt is with the book Shift Calling, is to remind the reader that you are more than those circumstances. You're not just a human being. You are a spiritual being as well. And you are also consciousness. You are a creative force who can imagine and manifest, can dream and create. We've created, I mean, think of it, we've created civilization just from what exists and grows above soil and below soil. That is pretty miraculous. We don't think about it. We don't see the connection between the iPhone and soil. I mean, it's a pretty big evolution that has occurred, right? But these are not shipped from out of planet, right? It's all from the soil. So first of all, we live in a magnificent, wondrous planet. And then we are wondrous, magical, we are magicians. We dream of Gandalf the Grey, from Lord of the Rings, who can swish things into beings and out of beings. And there we are on our iPhones, and we can swish apps into being and out of beings, but we don't think it's magical. It's super magical. It is unbelievable. And the fact that we can communicate, Zoom is providing this for us, it's magical. And the fact that I can take my ideas and put them with ink and paper into a book. It's just paper and ink, and then you read them And the paper and ink becomes ideas again, and they resonate with your experiences. We live in a magical world, and my desire for the reader of my book, Shift Calling, is to begin to do shifts that are more of a spiritual nature, so expansive shifts, expansive principles, so that you see yourself from this elevated place, from your highest potential place, and try to solve your mundane issues from this higher plane or more expansive plane, more loving plane. And if you have a different perspective, Einstein said we cannot solve a problem from the same consciousness from which it was created, right? So we need to shift our consciousness just a bit, just see it from a 1 degree shift, and suddenly our situation, whatever it is, financial, health, relationship, self-esteem, suddenly we have a teacher who sees us in a different perspective. Suddenly we shine. We have someone who sees us as like, well, you could actually be a fashion model. Suddenly we don't feel like that we are worthless anymore.
Right.
But the piece is we need to show up. We cannot sit and say the universe is not providing, because everyone is given opportunities, and we need to take the leap in the way that works for us, but we need to take the leap in order to cross the bridge to this new land.
Well, you brought up Einstein, and I'm a strong believer that just everything is energy. And in reading your latest book, there's an energy that you put into it, and there's an energy that can be felt by the reader. So that, somehow, I guess, the greatest energy is the energy of love. If you've put that love into that material, it comes out. And I think you've accomplished that.
That is so, to the person in me who doubts, is this book good? Is this book going to make it? Thank you for saying that for me. But I'm also glad for you that it has that experience, because I feel so devoted to help people to see a different perspective that will really transform your life profoundly in very simple ways. It's not like huge things. It's really small things, daily things.
Yeah.
And so I am happy that you feel that was in the book, and that you were able even just to connect to yourself and remember your childhood and and the shift that you went through, and the importance of somebody shifting your perception of yourself because they saw you differently. I mean, that is huge.
And that isn't the only one of your questions that I went through. I went through a lot of them.
Yeah.
But there's one other quantum shift that you mentioned in your book, and that was the decision to homeschool your children.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like you to just talk about that as a quantum shift, and what you went through internally to make that particular decision.
So can I ask you, as we don't have a lot of time, what drew you to this? Why is this significant? Because that will help me know how to answer.
Okay. Well, I tried to put myself in the position of my listeners, and as one of those folks, as we look at a quantum shift, something that's a major life decision that not only affects you, but it affects your entire family.
Yeah.
And it led to your founding of a school.
Yeah.
So there's such richness in
Yeah.
in what I read there, and
Yeah.
thinking of what that experience would be like. Because one of my interviews a while back was with someone who pulled up stakes in her 60s, moved to Rwanda, founded an orphanage, founded a
Mm.
school. The school now
Wow.
has over 1,000 students in it. And my wife and I went there for 7 months to help her out. Uh,
Wow.
but that said, I have some understanding of the kind of quantum leap,
Yeah.
if you will, that means for somebody.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, again, there must be something in me that is willing to take these big leaps, right? These big shifts, these big risks. I can always go back. I could always leave my boyfriend who became my spouse at the time and move back to Paris. I could always go back to the army 6 months later. It's not the end of the world, right? But at the time and it feels like the door is closing and there's no going back. But it really is. It's like, again, I was presented with circumstances, and I got a degree. I got a PhD in adult education and transformative learning. So I knew that it was a repair for me. It was a repair for me because we learned through very different ways of learning versus just frontal learning and rote learning and then regurgitating it in an exam. And so I knew how to create conditions for both individual and group transformation. And here my son was in the public school, and I mean, he was just slouching more and more, and the heavy bag at first grade, and he didn't want to go to school anymore. He tried to stay at home. It was just like this was not working for him. And I'd heard about homeschooling. It was never something that was on my radar. Um, but somehow, I don't know, they didn't even Google. I don't even know how I found this one family in the north of Israel that was homeschooling and it was well known for it. And I called them up and I said, "How do you homeschool?" And they don't even homeschool, they unschool. Just basically, you just live life as if it was summer camp, but you have this awareness that learning is everywhere and every opportunity can be an opportunity for learning and growth and transformation. And so you follow your kids' hobbies and interests and desires, you support them with their weaknesses, you emphasize their strength, and you give them a rich environment. And so that's letting go of everything of the public school. That's a big shift. But something in me, it just felt right. And I went for it. And I remember one morning I was lying in bed. We didn't have to get up to go to school. I had my older son to my right here, and my younger son was here, and he was breastfeeding. And it was just, I thought, this is right. I am the parent. I want to be in my children's life on a daily basis. I don't want our home to be a place where we leave in the morning and we come back at night. I want it to have a hearth. And so I went on this adventure and discovered my life purpose and, started the school, created an educational model that doesn't have a book yet, but I have to write a book about it. And, it just evolved, and it wasn't easy. But I'd go to sleep exhausted and wake up every morning happy for another homeschooling day. So I think what's important is that maybe because I have a need to share this with the world and I feel a sense of service, then I was given these extreme experiences, public school to homeschooling, military service to being a fashion model, staying to live in Paris, moving to live in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. So maybe that's why I was given such extreme experiences that I had to choose to shift. But it doesn't have to be like this for everyone. You can have small little shifts that occur. And and still you're on a spiritual journey. So I think that that's important. It's important to know that if you don't have to give up everything in order to have a profound spiritual journey, spiritual experience. What you need to do is learn how to expand your consciousness, and suddenly you'll have a spiritual experience. And that's what the 4 keys in the first book that you have are all about, how you can do it right here, right now, and change your mood for the better within 5 or 10 minutes, because you've expanded and you're connected to your inner being much more than 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So you go from anxiety to feeling kind of high on life, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how that evolved, but yeah.
Okay. I think that you're a person that many of us would call larger than life, but I would just say that you're not. You're as large as the life you make.
Right.
And
yes.
And that's what you're good at. So I hate to cut things off at this point, but we've pretty much run out of time. And I anticipated this just because you do have such a large life, and it's just so fascinating. And I can't wait for your third book about that school experience. So I always like to leave my audience with some things to think about, and I just wanted to ask you, what would you like to leave our audience with today?
Well, I think what I just said, it's like the missing piece in your life is you. It's like you have to show up for your life. And if you do, the universe is going to meet you with such love and possibilities and opportunities. So even if it's scary, don't sit on the side and say, oh, well, they have this and they have that. They're lucky. They had this breakthrough. There's a saying I love. Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And every one of us is. And so the only way to have something you've never had is to do something you've never done. And so show up, do a small shift, and see how your life begins to transform for the better. And then another shift, and it continues, and another shift. And suddenly you're 50 miles down the road and nothing looks like it did a year ago.
Thank you so much. This has just been wonderful.
Can I tell people where they can hear more about the book and when it's coming out? And I also offer a free chapter from the book.
Yeah, sure.
So the new book is called Shift Calling, a practical guide to transforming your world. And shiftcalling.com, if you press on that, then it will take you to my little sacred online space. There's a free chapter. There's other things there. We can communicate in person. It's like a private Facebook group, but not on Facebook. Really kind of private and sacred. So shiftcalling.com.
That sounds great. And I'll have that information on my website also, so they can find it there.
Thank you so much for this. It's been such a delight to reflect on my life and try to organize it in a way that it's understandable and it makes sense rather than just kind of babbling on. But I also enjoyed my conversation with you so much.
Well, likewise, for sure. Thank you so much, Anna. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.